Hey diesel fans, we had a customer today bring in a manifold that he ordered online, cheap. Boy, we found out it was cheap. Let's go into the comparison. We have one of our engineers here that's going to analyze the two manifolds.
All right here we have what is an aftermarket exact replica of the factory Cummins second gen manifold. And there's a few major differences you're going to see in them. Number one, obviously we have the joints here that allow for expansion, which keep these from cracking. Over time, these will shrink over time, and with heat, if they hit near the 1500 degree mark a lot, they're going to shrink and crack earlier. If they're kept cooler, they crack longer. They have more longevity. Ours never has this problem because we've got the joints. These are hydraulically press fit together. They'll never leak. Let me just show you what they've done on the factory manifold. First off, look at the size of holes here. They've got one small hole to locate this and larger holes here. The reason they do is so that this manifold can expand and contract and have some movement within these holes so it doesn't crack your head or crack the manifold or rip the bolts out. But what the problem is, when you're moving a manifold, because it doesn't have the expansion joints, you actually move the gasket underneath it, and it inhibits the ability to seal and wears the gasket out and makes the head not flat over time. That's one thing. Let's look at the thickness of ours, the actual tubing size. Ours here, we have a tubing size of 2.07 inches. This one, the tubing size in the same location is 1.9 or 1.91. So we're considerably less smaller on the tubing size. Now keep in mind, you don't want the tubing to get any larger than this. During our CFD analysis and our on-road testing, our dyno testing, if you go larger than this, which some of the manufacturers think bigger is always better, what it does is it inhibits the flow through the manifold, or it increases the volume the manifold carries, which does two things which can hurt the performance. The first thing it does, it slows the velocity of the exhaust down to a point where it has to re-accelerate through the turbo. And that actually, we saw a decrease of 40 horsepower if you go too big on the tubing from one of our competitors' manifolds. This one, on the other hand, is so small that it actually inhibits the flow to the point where the bottleneck is actually in the manifold as much as the turbo. Plus, it does not flow equally across the ports. Ours flows very equally from one port to another. It flows very evenly. You'll notice we're at the turbo flange here, where the exhaust exits into the turbo. This has this clearance port. And that's what they've done, is so you can get a bolt in and not have any interference issues. You know, when they're assembling these at the factory in mass quantity, they don't want to have any interference issues. And so the factory manifolds or this aftermarket manifold significantly reduces the flow through this part of the turbo. We're not so worried about clearance here. We deal with that. We have plenty of clearance with the bolts we provide, or if you have studs on your turbo already, or you just want to use standard bolts on it to couple it to the turbo. There's not a problem getting it attached, but yet we're able to keep a full port size to enter into your turbo. So the flow improves a ton there. Here's a third real difference to ours versus theirs, is on the stock manifold, they always have the spacers that they put, and the bolts are sticking out further. They do that for clearance reasons, so that they will clear here and you don't have the bolt to turn right around the tubing. But the other reason they do it is to allow for that expansion and contraction, so the spacer can kind of absorb some of that movement. Well, we don't have that problem with ours because of our joints. So in this section of the manifold, we cannot fit the spacer here because it actually hits right there on our manifold. So we just use a socket head bolt here, which works great on these two ports. But the reason we've done that is to get the flow we needed, we had to actually arc this manifold up slightly as we enter into the turbo, as it collects the exhaust from the multiple cylinders. On the factory manifold, you can see they're not worried about flow at all. What they've done here, and I don't even know factory, this is aftermarket manifold, but the factory is very similar. The exhaust enters here and it immediately has a huge turn. This exhaust comes in, it doesn't have that nice arc that makes it flow so nice through this part of the manifold. Because remember, the hardest part to get the manifold to flow through is the end cylinders. The center ones flow pretty well. Well, ours, we focused on the end cylinders flowing and then tie the middle cylinders in with it so they flow really nicely. This manifold does just the opposite. They focused on just getting the center ones, the exhaust out of the center ports, and the end ports have to kind of take care of themselves. And what you see is a significant decrease of flow in the end ports versus the center one. There's another item here, and it is the port size. Let me turn these manifolds this direction so you can see the inlet port size. We've directly tied ours to match the gasket size here, and so I'm just going to show you how much different in size ours is than the factory, than this one. Ours is that much bigger on every port to flow, and that doesn't maybe not look like much, but it makes a significant difference on letting the exhaust enter the manifold. And you can see on the bottom side, just let's look at the bottom side here. You can just see on the bottom side what they've done with the flow. I mean, look at that big cavity they've got in there that is going to inhibit the flow versus how ours transitions into it. It's a significant difference on the flow. We have not done an analysis on the material that this manifold is made of. You can see there's a significant amount of grinding here. We have not analyzed this material, but ours is made of the same material that your turbine housing on your turbo is made of. And it is not made out of stainless steel. The reason why is stainless steel moves a lot more with heat, and so it will expand and contract a lot more, and it actually breaks bolts and has all sorts of other issues with stainless steel. And last but not least, ours comes with pre-drilled and tapped pyrometer ports, both on this side, and then when you put it on a compound kit and you want to flip it upside down, we've got one right here as well. So it's very easy to deal with. You can read drive pressures or exhaust pressures, you can read pyrometers, or put a pyrometer in it, read your exhaust temps, all that without having to drill and tap, which may cause cracking in a manifold if you drill and tap on a thin area of the manifold.
Don't make a mistake, give us a call, and we'll hook you up with the best manifold.